We've all experienced that money touches everything. Well, a lot of other things touch your ability to handle your money well and live a good life. I'm excited for our chat today. I think you will be too. Today on the Catholic Money Show, we are joined with, I think, quite an exciting guest. I'm very happy to have this conversation. Today, our guest, he is a graduate of philosophy from William and Mary College. He's deeply passionate about the art of teaching and has spent his entire career in education. After directing the Institute of Catholic Culture, he founded Art of Workflow, where he teaches an organic behavioral system for managing your time, your to-dos, and your knowledge across all areas of your life. Let's pop in and see what we can learn today from Andy Hickman. Thank you for joining us today, Andy.
Hey, Jonathan, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's super appreciate it and looking forward to playing around and having fun in our chat.
Oh, I like that sound of that, playing around. Let's do it. So before we jump in, if there's folks out there who aren't as familiar with the work that you guys are doing over at Art of Workflow, give us just a quick, the quick idea of what's going on over there.
Yeah, nice. So workflow is an ecosystem of behaviors specifically for behaviors that if you can turn them into habits, then time management, to-do management, and knowledge management, which is we're going to hear a lot more of over the next 5 years, it makes those forms of management easy. So we basically help people turn off overwhelm and turn on their creativity.
Hey, okay. That sounds good. I like how you called it an ecosystem. Is that, I'm just guessing, that's like trying to call back on some of my grade school science class. That's right, because so many things are interconnected, and it's this whole system of what's going on.
Yeah, we're trying to express a couple different things here. One is like the organic and natural quality of it. So all the behaviors are innate. Like it's almost common sense. It's like we know how to do it. It's just not common practice. And these are inside the person. They're not outside. So we try to express, usually when people hear the word system, they think of some sort of external structure. And that external structure operates in some linear sequence. And we want to kind of shift those beliefs around and say, hey, actually, the source of your overwhelm is really fundamentally internal rather than external. And there are principles around it. This is an art that like has universal best practices, but it's not this like factory assembly line, like you do this and really like top down, establish your 5-year vision and then break this into quarterly goals. And right, we're trying to shake that up and say, wait, there's something that fits the dynamic life, that is natural, that is tool agnostic. And so we're trying to express that by using the word ecosystem, and then an ecosystem of behaviors. So things that are in the person rather than, whatever apps or features or stuff like that.
So you pulled out this example of, right, you have the big plan, you chop it up, and what are we doing, all that. Are those in I guess maybe your view of behavior and getting things done and all that, is that helpful? Is that not helpful? Is that something we should, I guess, maybe avoid doing or avoid doing alone, and we need to be doing something else to make that work?
Yeah, I think how you said it at the end there is probably the healthiest take. I think it is helpful, but I don't think it's the most prudent or practical starting point. So like what tends to happen if someone does view that as the starting point, it's like their life is messy, they feel overwhelmed. They buy a planner, and like the vision of life looks beautiful. It looks very ordered, right? The problem is like they adopt too much structure at the beginning on the front end, and it just isn't sustainable, and it crumbles within 2-3 months. And then because they like raise the bar maybe in one sense too high at the beginning and then failed, they have this bad taste in their mouth, and then they're like, well, I guess like being organized is just like not really my thing, like it's not me. And then you can just start to justify this, like, well, I'm a stay-at-home mom. It's like, who's going to make a timetable around my life, because Johnny's going to be sick, or I got to change his diaper or whatever. So I think that exercise is good, but it assumes like a couple different things are in place, like that you have space in your head to think about things, that you have some type of rhythm in your life, that you are even aware of what you want to fill those 5 years with. And it just can sometimes be a little bit artificial of an exercise to go like from 0 to 100 and paint this big picture, and then a couple months into it, you're like, oh, this is totally inaccurate and off the mark.
Yeah, but so if that's not a great starting point, what might be?
Yeah, I would say the best starting point is just recognizing what's on your mind. If you want, it could be kind of fun. Like if you have paper nearby, Jonathan, we could like do a little bit of this live.
I've got something I can write things on. All
Yeah,
right.
so typically I recommend somebody just using that prompt, what's on my mind? And then just writing some stuff out. But this, don't get fancy. We don't need complete sentences, just kind of almost like stream of consciousness-y. It can be personal, it can be professional, it can be small, big, clear, vague, whatever. You're not trying to come up with things. You're just trying to externalize what's already there in your mind, taking up space.
All right. I got a couple. Okay, so I share these now.
If you are comfortable, then then yes, you can. I also can share some examples of like common things that we typically hear or see.
Well, I'll share these. You might need to augment them to make them maybe a little more normal. Or so I've got is kid healthy? We've got one of our kids is sickish, so we're
Yeah,
figuring out what's going on with her later today. What's for dinner?
nice, classic.
Am I doing well in this interview? And
Oh,
ordering some WalletWin merch, and I'm wondering if it will get here on time.
this is great. Okay. Well, so let me first just start with the question of like, what's your experience of what you just did? Like, what did that feel like?
It was good, I guess. I mean, there's a number of things bouncing around in there, and I think maybe instead of actually thinking about the things, it was more of just thinking about the bouncing around. Like instead of maybe looking at the room going, and you just think this
Yeah.
room's really messy, instead of, okay, the clothes need to get picked up, the toys need to be put away, and I need to, I don't know, wipe down that surface or whatever. Instead of
Yeah.
actual things, I'm just thinking of like the bigger picture, I guess, but maybe not in a good way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so there's a couple different ways we could like parallel park into that. So one is to call out the distinction, and you just put it into words. There's a big difference between thinking of things and thinking about things.
Mm.
What is often behind someone who feels chronically overwhelmed is they've fallen into a habit of just thinking of things and never thinking about them. And now part of that happens because we've sort of our image of like what thinking is, or like why, like what thinking does, has kind of like rotted and deteriorated over time, I think a lot of Catholics unknowingly start to subtly adopt like a Gnostic view of thinking or knowledge. And let's just describe that a little bit. By that I mean,
Just hit pause. Talk about what is that we've unwittingly adopted, and then what have we given up?
yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's toss this out. Here's a very common belief that maybe isn't explicit in people's mind, but it's affecting their behavior. That belief is the following: thinking is a mental activity. Okay. Now, I would argue that's a false belief. Okay. And I would say that thinking is not a mental activity, it's a personal activity. I.e., we shouldn't, if we imagine that thinking is this thing that just happens inside here and everything else out here is unrelated to what's going on in here, we've got this sort of fragmented view of human nature and of human thought. So, and part of this is like not our fault. It's like, I think a lot of the technological shifts that have happened have like, were way faster than any of us were thinking, and they've radically affected how we engage in our day to day. And they've, in many ways, handicapped what used to be very natural. So we've basically lost a lot of our sensorial relationship with our thought. So like, we're doing this thing right now, like instead of
sorry.
No, this is great.
Sensorial? What do you mean?
I mean like our senses. Like
okay,
there's
I thought that might be it.
Yeah, exactly. So like to speak some like Thomistic speak, he says that the let me make sure I get this right, because if I start quoting Aquinas, I'm going to get some Aquinas nerds chasing after me a little bit. Okay, so this is in part 1, question 84, article 6, for those who are interested. He says that sensible knowledge is the material cause of intellectual knowledge. Sensible knowledge is the material cause of intellectual knowledge, i.e., that which kicks off the thinking process is our senses. He is speaking in line with a tradition, goes back to Aristotle. Aristotle, in his book, I think book 1 of Metaphysics, says all men desire to know. All men desire to know. And the reader kind of thinks like, how do we know that? Like how do we know that all men desire to know? And what he says is, we know this by the fact that all men take delight in their senses. Now, for like the modern mind, we've like adopted this like Cartesian image of like, okay, the person is like this soul that happens to be inside of a body, and these are like two separate things. They like kind of sometimes have to interact with each other, right? But we have this weird ghostly image of like, when I think, it's just like just this inside thing, right? Whereas really we're meant to always be integrating the entirety of our being into thinking. So how does this relate to, why does somebody get into a habit of thinking of things rather than about things? Okay. Well, previously, like most of the stuff we engaged with was right there in front of our face. So if I was like a farmer, like it's really clear what kind of work I need to be doing, because I just walk outside and I see like, oh, there's a bunch of weeds taking over that plot. And oh, this, I don't know, cart, the wheel's falling off, like I have to fix it. It's there, I see it, right? But like the modern worker now is like where is their work? It's like there's abstract problems about the business model, or and then like what tools I use to engage with my work are these like kind of odd virtual tools where I'm tapping some like plastic stuff and that changes things up here on the screen, right? But it's just less obvious. And what tends to happen is the information, the volume of information that's hitting us on a daily basis now in modernity is a lot higher than maybe in antiquity. And we start to become the passive recipient of information rather than like engaging and wrestling with it. Now we have a limited capacity of how much we can think of at any given point in time. And what happens is there's a good writer, David Allen, who's kind of the father of personal productivity. Mm-hmm. He uses this concept of mental RAM. We all have a limited amount of mental RAM. And what's happening is we are forgetting that we can let some of the stuff that's floating around in our head, we're forgetting that we can let it out and it's going to be okay. So we're using up all our energy to think of the stuff, to hold it in our mind, and we have no energy left to think about it. Mm-hmm. So you felt a little bit of that shift once you wrote the stuff out. Then you're like, oh, like, yeah, this has been floating around, but now I'm like thinking about it rather than thinking of it. Does that make sense? Or
yeah. See, yeah, you can get it out. You can figure out maybe, oh, well, this thing, I don't need to really think about it. Sorry. Until,
totally good.
This is next week or something.
Yeah.
So I can set that aside, but this one's maybe more immediate or more important. So we've written down the things that are floating around or whatever, or the things that we know we have to get done or whatever. Then
what next?
Is there another, not maybe secret, but like
yeah.
Is there a different way to do it than just like, okay, well, there's my list, I guess I'll do it?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there is. So here's let's connect it with another false belief that we see holding people back. Okay. Another false belief is that getting clear and getting organized are the same thing.
Okay. Well, then tell me what they are and aren't.
Right. So let's take those 4 things that you wrote down. Like, is kid healthy? What's for dinner? Am I doing well in this interview? And is a WalletWin merch going to arrive on time? Okay. A common mistake is that people have lists like that, and then they feel out of control in relation to it, and they jump over to, I need to organize this stuff. Okay. The mistake is that it's still stuff. Mm-hmm. And what you want to do is you want to first clarify it before you organize it. An organization should always be the practical arrangement of things that are clear. But it's commonly the like panicked rearrangement of things that haven't been fully decided, right? So how do we clarify? Let's take one of these things. Let's do WalletWin merch. Okay. If you were to confirm that it's going to arrive on time, would you be done with whatever that thought or impression represents for you?
Yeah.
Okay. And what would be the first thing for you to do to figure out if it's going to arrive on time?
I guess check the production and shipping timetables to see how long it takes.
And is that like a simple thing for you to do? Like you have that at hand, and or is it like you have to gather some material or something in order to check those production?
I mean, the biggest thing is I need to put the orders in, and then in order to do that, I need to finalize a design or two and just get the thing set.
Okay. So it's not necessarily check the production sheet thing. Sorry, I'm like totally unfamiliar with that. But it's more like you have to pick a design.
It's just like some little minor tweaks and figuring out which ones we're ordering for samples. So
There's like
this is
like
me
a
not doing my
smile
job
going on
doing
in
it.
your, okay, okay.
That's not
It's
what I
like
didn't want you to say.
coming from. Okay, so it's like finalize the design is the next step, right?
Yes.
Okay. Is Amanda like not supposed to hear this or something?
Yeah, I'm just glad this one isn't coming out today.
Okay. And in order for you to finalize the design, like, do you have everything in order to do that? And it's more just like you just need the time, and then like you would open up some whatever program you're doing the designing in, check a couple things, and is this like if you had the time, you could do it in like 15 minutes?
Maybe 30, but yeah.
Maybe 30. Okay, cool. Okay, great. Okay, so let's just take this one as an example. We have different things that are happening. Is the WalletWin merch going to arrive on time? There's like check the production flow and timetable of like, okay, if it's ordered by this, it would arrive by that. And then there's this finalize the design. Okay. So often when things come onto our mind, they need to be unpacked a little bit. Like they don't arrive like an Amazon package at the front door and it's like already there and I just have to like open it up. Okay. And what people will often do is if they recognize that they are constantly thinking of a thing and they can catch themselves doing that and then switch the process to be like, okay, now I want to think about it to figure out how I can actually get closure on this thing. They typically will get WalletWin merch on time. They'll take that and they'll put it on their to-do list. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the problem is like, they kind of know what that means somewhat, but like when it comes time to actually come to the to-do list and like crank through the things, they're not just having to execute, they're having to like do this translation work of like, okay, well, what exactly does that mean? And, oh, I need to check the production sheet. Oh, wait, but that actually means that only is relevant once the design's finished. So I actually need to finish the design. So the clarifying process is learning a fixed set of questions that always transforms whatever kind of impression or input into the most clear form. So for you, that would be the task of finalize the design. Mm-hmm. You want that on your to-do list, not is the WalletWin, ensure that WalletWin merch arrives on time.
That's good.
Do you feel the difference between those two things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I end up doing. I put down, it's like, okay, what are the things I need? Oh, I need to get the merch done or whatever. I need to do this. And then when I do sit down to work, I'm doing exactly what you said. Like, okay, this one's really important. So, okay, the merch, what do I need to do? I need to do this. I need to do this. I need to do that. So what's the, I'm sure I guess I don't know the answer because I'm not doing it this way. But what's the benefit of doing it when I think of it instead of like I guess to me maybe I'm wrong. It's looked like to me I'm thinking I'm taking the WalletWin merch item and I'm breaking it into its little pieces, and I'm either doing that like when I'm thinking about it, or I'm doing it like when I sit down to do it. So what's the benefit there of doing it earlier on?
Good. There's a couple different things. I want to make sure I hit them all, so I'm just jotting some notes. Okay, so one is just to distinguish, we're not recommending that you do this, you finish the whole thinking process as soon as you have the idea. This is another big mistake that we see people doing is like, they're in the middle of a project and like they've gotten some good momentum and then like another idea pops up. You don't want to like turn fully to that other idea and then like figure that whole thing out. That's going to break your flow. So you intentionally want to not fully think about it. You just want to scribble down a little note somewhere on a sticky note or whatever, and build a habit of coming back to that at a later time and getting clear on it. So just to clarify, we're not recommending to fully clarify a thought at the like onset of its like conception kind of thing.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. But your question still remains of like, well, but what's the advantage? I think the best answer would connect with something that you already do in your life. For you and Amanda, like, do you organize your week in a certain way? Like, you do a certain kind of activity on Monday, or you know what I mean, and you don't do that on other days. Like,
Mhm.
talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, we would do more like in our WalletWin Academy. We do something like on Wednesdays, or we do something at the end of the month. We or just in our lives. Um, we go over to our parents every Sunday for dinner.
Yeah,
We do homeschool here on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. They go into school on the other days. We um, have family night on Friday. Yeah.
nice. Okay. For whatever reason, when you were describing the going over to your parents at dinner, my mind went over to meal planning. And meal planning is like a really relatable example for everybody. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Meal planning is a whole lot easier when
Mm,
you do it all in one chunk. Like you sit down and you do the whole process of figuring it out rather than you fragment it. And every morning you're trying to figure out what's going to be dinner, that day.
yeah.
Right. So similarly, what we want to do is we want to batch and chunk the type of thinking of
Mm,
what's the next step on this thing. Not just for that one thing that you wrote down, but you would develop a habit of collecting a whole slew of these kind of things. And just like in meal planning, where you sit down and plan the whole week out, because it's easier to keep the momentum of that thinking process rather than to start and stop it, right? You're doing a similar thing with these ideas or thoughts, or you're going through that bulk process of clarifying all of them, so that once a week is off and running, you're not having to switch in and out of gears. Like you can just stay in execute mode rather than like strategy mode, right?
yeah.
Yeah, and it flows a lot better. It's just more efficient.
That's great. That's good. Um, so we've been talking a lot of, we've been kind of, it's been great. We've been bouncing in and out between kind of maybe higher level, like what's going on. I don't know if I'm using the word right, but kind of
It's great.
philosophical, like thinking about thinking stuff, meta thinking, and then getting into some practicals and kind of going back and forth between those. Um, Maybe to pop out a little bit back to the higher level stuff.
Yeah,
Why is this thinking through things, having like a organization, having clarity, having a workflow, why is that important, especially for Catholics?
yeah. Well, so one way we could frame it is like learning the art of workflow enables you to order your work. And so, in order to answer the question, why should we order our work? We have to be clear about why should we work? Why should we care about work? Right. Now, for a Catholic, that answer's easy, even though it might not be conscious.
Mm.
Actually, the Catechism has an interesting quote on prayer and its relation to work. It's in 2726 through 2727. And it says the following: many Christians unconsciously regard prayer as an occupation that is incompatible with all the other things they have to do. So some see prayer as a flight from the world in reaction against activism. But in fact, Christian prayer is neither an escape from reality nor a divorce from life. I go in that direction because, end quote, by the way, I go in that direction because um, I think we subtly start to adopt this belief of like, we blend like the sweat from the labor, or we blend those two things together and we think like, okay, Adam and Eve, they fell, and because they fell, now they have to work all the time. It's like, no, no, no. They were supposed to work before the fall. Mm-hmm. It's only like work is like hard and painful now, right? But I mean, Pope St. John Paul II spoke beautifully on this in Laborem Exercens. He talks about Genesis being the first, quote, gospel of work, which I think is an interesting phrase. And he says the church is convinced that work is a fundamental dimension of man's existence. And not only is it good in the sense that it is useful or something to enjoy, but it's also good as being something worthy. And this is his words. That is to say, something that corresponds to man's dignity, that expresses this dignity and increases it. So we have to first get clear of like, well, what is work? Work is the path of self-fulfillment. It is the exciting adventure of really the unfathomable reality that God wants us to be a collaborator with him. We're not just the small child that has to sit in the back in the booster seat. Like, he wants us to get our driver's license and take the wheel and do something creative and something impactful. So if that's the case, then me getting my act together in terms of ordering my work, it's not about this like cold mechanical efficiency thing, or I just want to get more money, or I'm obsessed with being active all the time. Me ordering my work is an expression of my love for God. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think people should care about it, is because it's like we've got this crazy, our Father wants us to be in the game with him. You know, and we can play a lot better if we're ordered in our life.
Yeah. And you mentioned, I think it's easy to maybe if you're hearing that, to think about work, you know, like your job.
Yeah.
But you're talking about how it's, would you say that the path to human fulfillment or something like that? Like there's, you can approach, maybe if you look at it at maybe, I don't know, more pure, that might not be the right way to think of it.
Yeah, I think that is the right word.
At work, as at a different way. It is, it's the things that we do throughout our whole life. And you guys, you talk about managing, you know, time and to-dos and knowledge. And I think that's kind of a good kind of holistic view of the work of our life.
Right. Yeah, work is, it's planning the surprise birthday party for your 5-year-old. It's like taking your wife out on a date. That's all work. It's work is the act of the will, right, for the good. And well, actually, so you bring up a good point. It's like another part of this is like an unfortunate tendency is like the professional life has all the structural components. Like it has due dates and it has like a boss sometimes, and so like our mind, we like structure. And so unfortunately, if we're being intentional about our work, that intentionality is usually all poured into our professional life. And then we just kind of wing it when it comes time to like building family traditions, or like spending one-on-one time with our kids, or like exploring your spouse and uncovering deeper layers together. Like that stuff just gets winged. And that's like kind of where all the gold is, you know? And it's like with you guys, what's really clear is like order doesn't like rip the life out of something. It doesn't sterilize it. And for like finances, right? You enable people to have a richer life, a more impactful life. I love what you guys were sharing in the 5-year reflection of like your own development and sort of like internal understanding, like what exactly are we doing with WalletWin? And it transformed to this really big, magnanimous vision of like, well, we want to fund the new evangelization. Like that's awesome, right? So I guess where I'm going is like, you can do those big creative things because you have structure and order around your finances. And the same dynamic applies outside of uh, financial management as well.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. If you don't budget, then you're just wondering where all the money went. And so if you're not planning out your time or your relationships, you're gonna wonder where all the time went. You're gonna wonder where
Right.
all that, well, the kids are this old now. What have we been doing? You have to be intentional about it to make sure that you do it well. And
Yeah.
we talk a lot about, or we often are invited to speak at our diocese. They do like a program for marriage prep that a lot of couples have to go to, and
Yeah.
we talk about some communication things in that program, and we bring in a couple things from Pat Lencioni and his kind of family meeting stuff. And it's like, yeah, you have to
Mm-hmm.
have meetings as a family. Like you do it at work, you see that you goes like, oh, this project's important. We need to check in and see how it's going. It's like, well, your family's really important too. You need to check in and see how it's going, and figure out what you want to have happen, what needs to happen,
Yeah.
where you're going with it. So yeah, work is in some ways it's not,
Here it comes.
maybe this isn't as impressive of a quote because you're quoting saints and all this stuff. I'm quoting Charles Dickens. I read Christmas Carol every year, and so it's in my head a lot.
Yeah.
And there's the part where right when Marley's ghost is visiting Ebenezer Scrooge at the beginning, and he's like, "Well, you were a good man of business," and I don't have it in front of me. I'm going to butcher it. He goes, "Business, business. Humanity was my business.
Mm.
Not what I did for work. Like he said something like my profession was a drop in the infinite ocean of my business."
Yeah.
And that is, ooh, I got goosebumps.
Let's go. Yeah,
Um,
dude.
because it's so true. There's so much to our lives, and then like that's the work, right? If we okay,
Yeah.
I've got a saint now. I've got a saint now.
Let's go.
Zelly Martin, in some letter she's writing, probably to one of her daughters or something. Um, and I think she's nearing, she's getting closer to the end of her life. She's getting sicker,
Yeah.
and she's talking about like this. She's the work she has to do. It's not her profession, right? She's not talking about making lace.
Yeah.
But she says, I have so much wood to chop, and I wish I got started soon. Like there's
Mm.
like we got like so Amanda and I will say that, we're talking about, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got some wood to chop. Because it's that's it. Like life is work. We've got to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's like a fun thing. It's like, you know what I mean? It's not like, oh, nice work. Which is, I'm not saying that you were saying that. It's more like, I think the average, like, I don't know, like the default response, and maybe it has to do with like, fighting against the current of fallen nature or something like that. But I feel like the default response in the face of work is like tiredness or like discouragement or like rather than like let's go, like let's do this,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I
It's
don't
it's
know
it's
where I
it's
was
this
going with that, but
mistaken idea that like, oh, so you're saying my whole life is work? And then now you're thinking your whole life is a Dilbert comic strip.
right.
Instead of, oh, work is everything I do? And it takes that comic strip and you're just like blowing it up. And it's like, oh, okay, maybe there's some parts I don't like, but think of all the things that I get to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, we don't have to live a Dilbert existence.
I think that's right.
This is so good. Um, wow. Okay, so I'm just kind of put it all together here.
Nice.
I might end up working backwards, but everything that we're called to do, especially the good stuff, the most important stuff, that's the work that we're called to do. And if we want to do a good job of our work, we want to work well, and be that have that role of co-creation and have playing our role, right, in the salvation of the world that the Lord invites us to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we It's a pretty big job, so we should probably know what we're doing, or at least plan it out.
Mm-hmm.
And so doing that, we need to enter into those things that we're called to be doing, right? So we need to not just think of them, not just make some haphazard list and then go at it. We need to make time to sit down and actually plan out what might need to happen for those things to happen. So we can be, so we have our strategic time. Strategic? Or is that? We got to figure out what needs to happen to make some of those bigger goals happen, right? Better relationship with my wife. Okay, that's good, but what do I need to do for that? What do I need to do for whatever? So I need to plan that out, and so that means I need to kind of carve out time, find the time to actually think about the things I'm being called to do, so that I know what actual steps I can take to make them happen in my life. What did I miss? What did I? What did I?
I think you very little. I think that's really great. So anything that I say here is more like sprinkles and like whipped cream or something on top, which is like you mentioned something at the very beginning, which is like you distinguish like the important work from like the not important work or something like this, right? And we just want to make sure that we're framing all of the work as important. So, like, there's my favorite. You guys recently on the podcast had that homily on the dishonest steward, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. My favorite homily is from Saint Jose Maria Escrivá, and it's called Passionately Loving the World. And there's a line in there, this is from 1967, where he says, any attempt to escape from the noble reality of daily life is for you, men and women of the world, something opposed to the will of God. God is calling you to serve him in and from the ordinary, secular, and civil activities of human life. There's no other way. Either we learn to find our Lord in ordinary, everyday life. We're talking laundry, we're talking changing the diaper, or we shall never find him.
Mm.
And so it's just making sure that we're not opposing, we're not putting the mundane in opposition with the mystical. And that we are living one life of spirit and truth. And we're not imagining that when I fold the laundry or do the dishes that I'm hitting like a pause button on my spiritual life. But that's where he is. That's where he wants to see us. And that's where we do the little details, the little, like the little touches between a husband and a wife. It's the little things that mean the most. So these are the moments of intimacy with our Lord. Let's take care of them. And then the only other thing I would say is like, well, what's the whole process of taking care of it? And it's just like with finances, there are best practices. We don't have to like approach this as a blank canvas. I know a lot of Catholics, like the only advice that they feel like is out there around managing their business or getting organized in life is by authors that aren't Catholic and often have a whole slew of incorrect beliefs in there. So I guess the only other thing I would say is there is an actual art to managing the mundane, and it's universal. It doesn't matter if you're a stay-at-home mom or you're the CEO or you're an introvert or extrovert, or whatever. And I think those two beliefs um, help shape and govern or direct the conversation around overwhelm in a good direction.
That's fantastic. Thank you. For as soon as you start, it's like, yeah, okay, it's all important.
Right?
um, okay, so if so, whoever is listening out there, me included, and you're interested, you're like, okay, this is kind of sparking some thoughts, some desires in you, and you want to learn a little bit more. Where can people, I mean, do you have recommendations of where they can go? Especially, I mean, what do you have out there that we can
Yeah.
dive into more? What's our next step after hearing this and getting part of our mind blown up?
I think what might be the most attractive next step is learning just a little bit more about how does what's the foundation for this stuff, right? And like I was saying, like, when I first started trying to figure this out myself, I had to do all this like weeding of like, okay, here's this really good nugget, and then like the next paragraph is this like weird new age spirituality. You know what I mean? Like, and that can make a Catholic hesitant
Mm.
and like just not at ease while they're trying to figure out the way to organize stuff. So I would say that there is a paper I've written that goes through Aquinas's analysis of what happens in the mind when a human does any activity. And we're used to thinking like, okay, what's the difference between a human and like the rest of the animals or whatever? It's like, well, we have an intellect and a will. What was really mind blowing for me the first time is when I heard from a professor like, hey, there's more detail behind that. Like, yes, you have an intellect and a will, but there are 6 specific acts that the intellect does and 6 specific acts that the will does.
Mm.
And you can map this out and sort of have a diagram of what exactly is going on in the mind. And what I think is a helpful first step is to be introduced to that a little bit. And then that helps a Catholic feel more comfortable, like, okay, we're articulating, I would be adopting a set of behaviors that is founded on the church's understanding of human nature. That's the starting point. So if someone wanted to, I don't have any fancy things set up. If you sent me an email so my email address is andy@artofworkflow.com, and you just say paper, Aquinas paper, or whatever in the subject line, then we can have a conversation. I can send you that paper, and that might be an interesting starting point.
Cool.
Or if you just go to artofworkflow.com, you'll see information on there. I've written a story about what exactly this art is and what exactly are the 4 behaviors we touched on without calling them by name. We touched on the behavior of collecting and the behavior of processing. There's 2 other ones that round out the picture. And you can read that story in its entirety. There's no paywall or anything. If you go to artofworkflow.com, you'll see a form and you can sign up on there.
Cool. Yeah, I'm looking at it. It says the world's first email-based book on workflow. Does that mean I get like a little bit of it every day in my email, or?
Yeah, so like one of the things it took me about like 4 years to get, you get married, you have kids, like life turns its fire hose on you, and you're like, what was that comedian? He was like, having a child is like, or starting a family is like you're like drowning in a pool of water, and then someone hands you a baby. So like, there were so many times where I would spend all this time reading these books, thinking that I understood what the author was saying, and then trying to put it into practice. And then figuring out I misunderstood the author's intention and having to reset my whole system. It was like, if I could just speak directly to the author, it'd save so much more time. So the primary reason for having an email-based book is that you're a one click away from speaking directly to the author. It's in the medium of a communication medium, right? So I just think it facilitates better engagement with the writing, and it makes it easier to like ask a question than have that clarified.
Cool.
And it also allows someone to receive it, anywhere around in the world. It's just a little bit quicker.
That's great. Awesome. Well, I'm signed up.
Nice.
So, I guess it comes out on Wednesday, so I'm looking forward to it tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And again, people, you can sign up for that artofworkflow.com, and you just scroll down a little bit and you'll see the section about the Art of Workflow story. And if you're a quick scanner, when you hit those two little columns of I guess it's like the table of contents, you'll know you're there. Fill out that form and sign up. I'm really looking forward to reading this. So I'm pumped. I'm excited. Andy, thank you so much for joining us today on the Catholic Money Show. I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I'm sure the listeners have too. Thank you very much.
I really appreciate it, Jonathan. And thank you and Amanda for what you're doing. It was really energizing to, Liz and I started this ourselves, and seeing you guys do your thing as a married couple is really inspiring. And you're doing really great work. And I just feel very honored to be able to have the conversation with you.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, thank you. And if you like the show, please rate us wherever you are listening, watching, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us today. You can learn more about this show and the WalletWin program at WalletWin.com.
Music in this episode's from Dylan Gardner. Listen to his new album, Almost Real, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your music. See you next week.